Kalku, Director General Subramanian, distinguished guests, and all others joining us today. I would like to welcome all of you to the virtual conference on circular economy in emerging markets, unlocking the potential for green recovery in developing Asia. This is a regional side event of the World Circular Economy Forum. So this is an event organized by the Asian Development Bank Institute, the Finnish Innovation Fund Citra, and the Institute of Strategy and Policy on Natural Resources and Environment in Vietnam. So we're having simultaneous Vietnamese interpretation for this event. So please feel free to click on the desired language, either English or Vietnamese, on the bottom panel of your screen. So my name is Derek Hondo and I'm from ADBI, and I'll be your MC for today's event. So let me quickly remind everyone of some house rules. And so for all presenters, please keep your microphones off and cameras off when you're not speaking. And panelists, please keep your cameras on during the panel discussion. When sharing your presentation file, please click on Share Screen at the bottom panel and have your file open beforehand. Please remember to have it in slideshow mode when you're presenting. We kindly request all attendees to keep their microphones and cameras off throughout the entire event. You may enter your questions in the chat box located on the bottom panel. The moderator of each session will do their best to address these questions in the Q&A portions. And lastly, just to recap, please select the correct language at the bottom of your screen, either English or Vietnamese. And to access the bios, the presentation files, and the agenda for today's program, please use the QR code or the link provided in the chat. So without further ado, let's move into today's agenda. And sorry, one more thing I wanted to mention is we're also having virtual notes being taken. So I'd like to introduce Heather. So she's on the top left of your screen. She will be taking graphic visual notes throughout the event. So let me introduce you, Professor Tetsushi Sonobe. He is the Dean of the Asian Development Bank Institute, and he will be giving the welcome and opening remarks today. So before joining ADBI last April, Dean Sonobe served as the Vice President of the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies here in Tokyo and taught economics for 30 years at the Tokyo Metropolitan University and GRIPS. He is a recipient of the Nikkei Book Publication Prize and the Masayoshi Ohida Memorial Prize, and a founding board member of the Japanese Association for Development Economics. His research interests are centered on the empirics of economic development, particularly the roles of industrial clusters, human capital, social capital, human management practices, the market, competition, industrial development, and in developing Asia and other regions. So Dean Sonobe, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Derek. Good day. Welcome, everyone. I'm very happy you've all joined us today to focus on the big solution rather than the big problem. I don't like to talk about the big problem. Oh, I'm sorry, I mentioned it mistakenly. Transitioning from a linear to circular economy makes sense, particularly for developing Asia. I commend the work and commitment of our distinguished guests toward realizing this transition. His Excellency Minister Chan Hon Hap, Government of Vietnam, Elina Kaluk, Government of Finland, Miranda Shinitoga, Ellen MacArthur Foundation, Ramesh Subramaniam, Asian Development Bank, Janet Selan, UNSCAP, and Linda Arthur of ADBI. In addition, a warm welcome to the authors and discussants who will present important policy research and share their insights today. Some say that circular economy is not new, and they would be partially right. I'm happy to say that Japan, home to ADBI, was one of the earliest countries to enact national law on resource efficiency back in 2000. These early efforts were mainly geared toward efficient solid waste management. Although it's an important part of circular economy, it's far from the entire picture. What the discourse on circular economy has brought is a systemic vision for change across diverse sectors, including agriculture, manufacturing, food, textiles, infrastructure, and tourism. I very much hope this conference will be the first of many events and knowledge products from ADBI on the circular economy. Let me also say that today's event is a side event to the landmark circular economy event of the year, the World Circular Economy Forum, which will be hosted by Canada from September 13 to 15. Let me close on the final note of thanks to our audience for taking the time to join us today. Please engage in the dialogue very actively by sending your questions and comments. With this, I wish you all a very successful and fruitful conference. Thank you very much. Derek, back to you.
Thank you very much, Dean Sonobe. Now let us move back to the keynote address. Today we are honored to have Miranda Schnitger, government lead from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, to give an overview of circular economy and its role in addressing global challenges while creating sustainable opportunities. This will set the tone for the rest of the presentations and discussion in today's event. So Miranda leads on engagement with national policymakers as part of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's institutions, governments, and cities team. This includes exploring the conditions they can set to enable, accelerate, and lead to the transition to a circular economy. She recently led the development of the Universal Circular Economy Policy Goals, a framework of 5 goals to support a common direction of travel in circular economy policy development. So Miranda, the floor is yours.
Hi, Derek. Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for the invitation to join you. I'm very excited to be here for today's discussion. So I think my slides are just appearing. Yes. Okay, great. So I wanted to start by actually picking up on some of the comments we just heard in the introduction. So the circular economy, if we go to my first slide, is a much bigger idea than just recycling. It is a vision about how we can transform the economy and how we use and manage materials and products in a new way. It goes beyond doing less damage within our current system to rethinking how we design our economies to drive economic development, value creation, and is based on 3 core design principles that I've noted here on this slide. Design out waste and pollution, keep products and materials in use, and regenerate natural systems. These principles can inform how we design products, services, and systems to create a regenerative, restorative economy. And what I find really exciting about these principles is that they open up new ways of thinking and opportunities for how, not only how we design, also how we design and think about business models, how we look at collaboration and reverse logistic opportunities. And there's a whole range of actors that are involved in making this transition happen, which I will cover briefly in this keynote before we go into the detail of the panel. So to look at some of the opportunities, in 2015, one of our early sort of geographically focused studies was focused on Europe. And we found that when we modeled just for 3 sectors, so construction, food, and mobility, there could be an annual benefit yield of 1.8 trillion euros by 2030, double that if we stay in the current linear path. We then did subsequent testing of the idea with models for India and for China, and we found similar positive economic benefits with household and business savings, alongside emissions reductions and pollution also going down. To look at it from a jobs perspective, the OECD recently ran a study assessing multiple different studies and concluded that with the adoption of circular economy policies, there will be an average net positive employment gain. And to take this into sort of more granular, imaginable space, if we think about plastic packaging and we apply circular economy to a sector like that, alongside reducing the amount of plastic that enters our oceans by up to 80%, it can again reduce the emissions by 25% and bring job creation opportunities and business savings. So the opportunities and the benefits from the circular economy transition are significant and broad. And I'll just touch on one more example from a recent World Health Organization study that looked at the benefits for direct and indirect health. And these were coming from the reduction in pollution, the improved natural system resilience, improvements in food safety and security, as well as reducing costs for the healthcare services. So at a time when we're also now trying to recover from a global pandemic, the circular economy offers a really attractive path forward. I just want to highlight on my next slide the connection between circular economy and the SDGs. So yes, circular economy is very often connected to SDG 12, where it has its natural home. It's a key part of how we're going to achieve sustainable consumption and production, because we're going to transform the system through applying these principles across sectors. But what I love about this research from the IRP is also that the benefits of a circular economy transition apply to at least 11 sustainable development goals. So I've already mentioned climate benefits, benefits to biodiversity, but also importantly, things like SDG 9, so the inclusive and sustainable industrialization that picks up on innovation and also the large infrastructure need, which is particularly strong in this region. So to dive in for a moment to the circular economy benefits to climate change, on my next slide. Clearly, this year is another important year. We have COP26 coming up in November, and we also have COP15 on biodiversity. Our recent study on the contribution that circular economy can make found that 45% of emissions come from the way we produce products and food. So these emissions in this part of the pie that you see here are not going to be able to be tackled through the renewable energy transition alone. And it's going to take a range of other solutions. And this is where the circular economy really comes in. Through the redesign of how we manage products, we can and design out waste and pollution, we can reduce emissions. We can keep the embedded energy and the emissions that have already been made in use by keeping products in the system for longer. And also by switching to regenerative natural systems, we can sequester carbon. So there's a range of opportunities here of how circular economy contributes to the climate change challenge. Looking at how different actors have a role to play, we think business, government, and finance have a really important upstream role to play. This is because these three groups have a real say in determining what goes onto the market, and once things are on the market, how they are kept in use. So in circular economy language, one often sees the term upstream. Policymakers can inform upstream decisions through the regulations and the incentives and disincentives that are put in the system. Businesses make upstream choices through how they produce, how they design, how they manufacture, and also how things are offered once they are on the market. Are they sold outright, or are they using other alternative options for getting the product to the customer and then potentially back through reverse logistics? And finance clearly has an important role to play in assessing the risk of the current system, assessing new business models, and bringing these opportunities to life through the financial support that they can give to new opportunities. And we've seen in the last 5 years a number of initiatives amongst these three actors growing, which is really encouraging. So to give a quick flavor of opportunities in three sectors that we are focused on, plastics, fashion, and food. So thinking about the three principles, if we think about how they apply to plastics, there's a role for eliminating plastic that we don't need. There is a role for innovating to ensure that what the plastic that we do use is reusable, recyclable, or compostable. And there is a role for the plastics that's on the market to be supported by systems and models and choices that keep the plastic packaging in the economy for longer and helping it to circulate. So there's eliminate, innovate, and circulate opportunities. And we've seen through reusable packaging that there's a 10 billion innovation opportunity, savings of up to 25%, job creation opportunities, and also savings to governments who are otherwise funding the current system, which is costly. Over 1,000 organizations that we work with have joined in signing a common vision for a circular economy in plastics, and they represent 20% of the plastics value chain, coming from different parts of the value chain. These organizations report annually on progress towards common targets that they've all agreed to by 2025. And they are also supported by initiatives that are local in plastics pacts that take place in countries or regions. The most recent one that launched was Australia, New Zealand, the Pacific Islands. So those are some of the initiatives that are taking place in plastics. In fashion, we think about the circular economy in terms of how can these items be used more, how can they be made to be made again, and how can they be made from safe and renewable or recycled inputs. A circular economy for fashion could address up to $500 billion of value that's currently lost due to clothing being underutilized and also due to the ineffective collection and recycling infrastructure that we have today. But at the same time, there are really positive trends taking place. So clothing resale is expected to be the biggest part of fashion by 2029. And food, again, it's interesting to apply the principles to the different systems because, as was said in the introduction, different systems and sectors have different characteristics. So here in the space of food, we need to think about how do we design and market healthier food products. Design in the concept in the space of food can be an unusual thing to think about, but actually there are choices that are made in terms of how the ingredients that are used, the inputs that are used during the agricultural phase. How can we source regeneratively? And how can we make sure that the food that we use is sourced locally where appropriate? And then finally, there is, of course, a large element of byproduct in this sector. So how can we grow the bioeconomy and find innovations there? Each one of these three sectors is underpinned and supported by other sectors. Infrastructure, which is a really large growth area, particularly in this region, supports each one of these. So there's a really important role for applying circular economy principles to how infrastructure is designed, but also how infrastructure, where it is placed and the relationship of different elements to one another, how they then facilitate the exchange of products, the circulation, new business models existing. So industrial symbiosis is one of these examples where it's very careful thinking about businesses that are placed, co-located in order for byproducts from one to become input items for another business. In the finance space, I just wanted to very briefly highlight that over the last year, we've seen significant growth in the circular economy idea being taken up. There was a 14-fold increase last year in public equity funds that focused on circular economy. And at the same time, there's been a similar steep growth in the bond market, bank lending, project finance, and insurance. Compared to the entire sector, this is still a new area, but these are all positive signs and supported by policy initiatives, such as work to improve standardization and reporting mechanisms. For example, the EU taxonomy work that's currently ongoing, Chinese supervisory scheme, for green bond verifiers, and further initiatives around the non-financial reporting. And now I just want to conclude on the role that government can play, because this is the area that I focus on the most. So over the last year, we've also seen a lot of new initiatives being launched in different regions. So in February this year, the Global Alliance for Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency was launched, which has countries joining it from every region of the world. This is a forum that's new and going to be a source of exchange of best practice. There's a real recognition currently that as the idea of circular economy gets picked up, which is incredibly positive, there is a need for alignment between different systems so that products can flow and trade opportunities can continue to exist, so that the infrastructure in one part of the world also supports the activity in another part of the world. And then by region, there are also initiatives taking place. Within Europe, there's circular economy as a core part of the European Green Deal. In Africa, there is a new alliance it's actually existed for a while, but it's being formalized and grown at the moment for the African Alliance on Circular Economy. Similarly, in Latin America, there is a new initiative to bring together the countries of that region and focus on developing a common vision for circular economy there, identifying which sectors are the key opportunity areas, which is similar to how the African Alliance is also going about it. And in this region of Asia and Oceania, we've seen an increase in circular economy being highlighted as part of SDG 12 plans, a focus on improving waste management, And there's a real opportunity here to go beyond the waste management as we know it, to moving on to thinking about resource management. How are these things kept in the system so that they can be used again? So with this in mind, and I touched already on the idea of alignment being really important, I want to conclude by sharing the framework that we launched recently, the Universal Circular Economy Policy Goals. This is really taking the 3 principles I mentioned at the beginning to eliminate waste and pollution, keep products and materials in use, and regenerate natural systems, and ground them in 5 areas where policymakers can really take the leadership role in incentivizing and creating a system where circular economy is now the norm, rather than an activity that is growing on the edges, but in fact the incentives within the system are still encouraging a linear cycle. So the first is to stimulate design for circular economy. And examples of policy measures that would support this are product policies, which is a build on earlier efforts, for example, around eco-design, which looked at the energy efficiency of products, to now moving on to thinking about how can policy support design decisions that means that products will be more durable, more repairable, remanufacturable. And each one of these decisions can then support local infrastructure that has the skills and opportunities to service that. If you think about the construction sector, it would be looking at construction policies that can support disassembly rather than demolition. Or in the agricultural space, it's thinking about how regenerative agriculture can be supported. And there's various policy measures and opportunities that inform that, including for all 3 of these policies around chemicals and input legislation. So making sure that what we put into the system in the first place is compatible with a system that then can support that staying in use. This is the upstream element. It is very much supported by the second goal, which looks at once everything is on the market, how do we keep those items in use? So extended producer responsibility is a key part of this, so are deposit return schemes. There are also opportunities to use tax incentives to stimulate more activity, for example, in the repair and remanufacturing sector. Another part of this is perhaps also including initiatives that would reduce the reliance on landfill and incineration currently. So looking at how is the resource management to keep things in use more accessible, where is the infrastructure for that in place? And are the alternatives becoming less attractive? This point about how those two goals work very well together. So you have the upstream and then the downstream supporting each other, forming a key loop. And within that, you have multiple different options. But what's really interesting about goal 3 is that it recognizes that there are wider incentives in the economy. And these often sit and are the domain of multiple ministries across government, but particularly economics ministries. So looking at what does subsidies back, and are they aligned with the circular economy principles? In the pandemic, we've seen several governments attach conditions to funding and support that has been given to the business sector. Are those conditions supporting a trajectory that will now take us to a new system, or are they simply reinforcing the linear economy, which we know is leading to multiple global challenges? Public procurement and making sure that that is aligned and creating the economies of scale is a really important lever for government. And so do various other initiatives that policy measures that need to be looked at to make sure that the wider economic incentives are there. And this can range from an assessment of labour market policies to a look at competition policies. And trade is a really important part as well. A lot of what I've said can be thought about in a national context, but actually the international context of how materials flow is really important to build into policy measures that reach across borders. So trade is a key one. The 4th goal is looking at investment, which will be unsurprising, but public sector and how it can also leverage more private sector investment is key. And it's important to highlight that actually this is in infrastructure, in innovation, and in skills. There is a transition in this model. And there is a need to harness things like digital innovation, but also recapturing more traditional innovations that have perhaps been lost along the way. How can those be supported, and how can government funds into research help these new ideas and opportunities come to scale? How can public funding work with the private sector to put the infrastructure in place? And how can public finance capabilities also work with education? Is circular economy included into the curriculum? Are there opportunities to keep training and learning the skills of a circular economy model? So to conclude all of these, and supported by these 4 goals, is the important point of collaboration, which I'm sure will come up many times today. But there is no one actor with their own actions that can actually make the transition happen alone. Policy sets the conditions, and through that creates a leadership role, but it can't do it alone, and so many sectors have their own intricacies. So a collaboration between the private and public sector is critical to this. It can also help identify where should the targets be placed. Can there be an alignment, for example, in international standards or international policies and regulations? And at the same time, can the targets reflect the local starting point and make sure that they are stretching and ambitious, but also matching of the initial start point? Data is a real part of developing a sense of our progress in this. And again, that's something where the private and public sector can collaborate. And ultimately, if there is inclusion in the development of policies, there will also be more ownership and more discoveries along the way, because the circular economy is about innovation. It's something that we together will create through design and through upstream thinking. So making sure that there is inclusion of multiple voices is really important to this. So to conclude, these 5 goals sit together as a framework. The policy measures that support them are multiple. Individual policy measures can support multiple different goals as well, because the system is interconnected. It's high level, but that's with the purpose of making sure that there is alignment and a drive in the same direction, but in full recognition that every country will start from its starting point with its priority sectors. So from that point of view, it's a framework of guidance, and then must be discussed and using local expertise to bring it to life. So I very much hope that in this discussion, we will hear more of that local expertise, and these frameworks can be a guide, but that we can get more into the detail from here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Miranda. So next, may I ask that all panelists, presenters, and those on today's agenda, please turn on their cameras for a quick group photo. If you're not on the agenda, may I kindly ask that you keep your cameras off for the speakers. Thank you very much. Okay, just a minute. Okay, are we ready? 1, 2, 3. Ready? Again, 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. So now this brings us to the next part of on the agenda, the panel discussion. So from linear to circular, what will it take? So for this session, we have Janet Salem, an expert on circular economy from United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. So Janet has been working with the United Nations over the last 15 years with a focus on circular economy and sustainable consumption and production. Currently, she is with UN SCAP, managing projects on technology and circular economy, such as Closing the Loop project, which focuses on measuring, monitoring, and preventing plastic pollution. So Janet, the next 50 minutes are yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Derek. Greetings to everyone present. As Derek said, I'm Janet. I'm with you from the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, and I've been working on the topic of circular economy the last 15 years. So it's a real pleasure to be here and to be able to explore this topic with some amazing speakers in the panel. So let me start by introducing each of the speakers, and then I'm going to ask each of them 1 or 2 questions about their perspectives on circular economy. So allow me to start with His Excellency Tran Hong Ha, Minister of Natural Resources and Environment in Vietnam. So the Minister has been the Minister for Natural Resources and Environment in Vietnam since 2010. So over 11 years now, actually almost his anniversary. Previously, he served as the Director General of various agencies and administrations within the Vietnamese government, including the Environmental Protection Agency and the Environmental Administration. So very long history and career in the environment sector, and I'm looking forward to hearing His Excellency's perspective on the topic. After we talk to His Excellency, we will move to Undersecretary Kalku. So Alina Kalku is the Undersecretary of State at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Finland, and also the Governor for Finland of the Asian Development Bank. So prior to her current position, Undersecretary Kalku has served as Director General of the Department of the Americas and Asia at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. That's from 2005 to 2015. And before that, as Director of the Security Policy Unit at the Political Department of the Ministry. Mrs. Kalku joined the ministry in 1983. So again, a very long career in this area. And in those early years, she served abroad in the Finnish embassies in Europe and North America. Then we will move to Ramesh Subramaniam. He's the Director General of Southeast Asia Regional Department in the Asian Development Bank. Ramesh has been with the Asian Development Bank for 24 years. He's worked in different functions and areas over 25 countries. So he has lots of experience from a lot of different places across the various sub-regions of Asia and the Pacific. In his current capacity as Director General of the Southeast Asia Department, he's in charge of the ADB's relationship with the 10 countries in the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, and Timor-Leste, as well as all of its sovereign engagement. I'm very interested to hear about the experience, particularly in ASEAN. And last but not least, we have Linda Arthur, Senior Capacity Building and Training Specialist at the ADB Institute, more of the think tank perspective. So Linda works with government officials by designing knowledge products to strengthen policy making and implementation across a range of priority areas for both developing and emerging Asia, including the following topics: the use of strategic foresight for inclusive recovery policies, very topical right now, as well as innovation ecosystems to spur green growth, again, very relevant to circular economy. And one of my favorite topics, leveraging behavioral insights to augment development impact. So I'm very much looking forward to all of these perspectives. But let me come back to His Excellency Tran Hong Ha, Minister of Natural Resources and Environment in Vietnam. Now, my first question is about the motivation of countries to move towards circular economy. So we know that there are different motivations of different countries. So some different countries are motivated to reduce pollution within their country, and others are motivated to reduce the dependence on resource extraction, primary industries. Whereas others are interested for more economic or security reasons, such as economic growth potential. We heard about that from Miranda. There's a huge economic opportunity in the circular economy. There's also an opportunity for jobs. And lastly, what could be relevant, be interesting to talk to Mrs. Kalku about is reducing import dependence. So, Your Excellency, I'd like to understand what are the main motivations for Vietnam to shift to a circular economy?
Trước tiên tôi xin được chào.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Leaders from ADB, leaders from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Finland, and also other panelists and speakers for today. I'm very excited to be a part of our virtual conference that touch upon a very important, current, and also urgent issue that we are talking about. And this is also one of the key issues that the globe is thinking about, especially before the front of COP26 in the UK on climate change in the coming time. And here we are in Vietnam, very busy to prepare for the implementation of the message for the International Environment Day, which is a decade for recovery of natural ecosystem, Ms. Janet Salem has raised three main points, three main motivations, and I think I can say agree with all of the three. I think maybe the motivations for Vietnam to shift to the circular economy are there. To the developing countries that have economic conditions like Vietnam, as well as the movement from linear to circular economy. I think these are the things that we are considering given our conditions. So our selection and shift to the circular economy is mostly driven from the fact that our natural resources are limited, and climate change has posed a lot of negative impacts on the development. There has been collapse of natural ecosystems. Meanwhile, the fossil fuels are being depleted, and other resources, for example, steel and iron. As per one statistical figure of the World Bank recently, our globe and also our global economy has gained to a consumption level that is equivalent to how to say 3 times of available resources that can meet with the current demand for the globe to develop. One more thing I want to say is that we have been based on the irrelevant approach, and we also making some mistakes in our treatment and relationship with the nature. So a majority of economic activities are the key reason for the loss of biodiversity. And we can also witness the other big issues of globe in addition to the climate change, for example, marine related issues, marine plastics and debris, which has become an urgent matter for the world to tackle. So under the pressure of the population increase and also the pressure to change and shift our growth pattern, circular economy is a kind of extremely important journey in our way to achieve the sustainable development goals. In that pathway, we also consider circular economy as a paramount important measures in addition to the low carbon economy growth and also green economy. I think these all paths will lead us to our destination of sustainable development. As you have raised in the openings and also in the introduction, circular economy is a start of a new approach that our human beings would be based on our physical resource and capital, can save and can also utilize such nature using our knowledge and design to create and also innovate new sectors and new jobs by extending the life of materials, of resources. So this would bring us with a lot of economic returns and also create more jobs, more skills, and also economic returns. I would like to emphasize that the concept of circular economy can be a little bit wider. Here we have 9R. One more thing we should pay attention is that in the T4G that you have mentioned, it is about approach to the renewable and clean energy that can replace the current fossil fuel. I think this is the motivation and also the objectives of Vietnam towards sustainable development, and also to have Vietnam gain the commitments, for example, under Paris Agreement and also international conventions on biodiversity, and also agreement to fight against marine debris and plastics. I think these are the choices that we have made when we are fully aware of the importance and benefits of circular economy given the current context. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've mentioned a number of...
I'm ready to and willing to listen to your discussions and to provide any responses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've raised a number of important priorities when it comes to circular economy. I heard about jobs, I heard about new economic sectors, climate change, and reducing pollution, which brings me to my next question, which is about interministerial cooperation. Now, I'm curious, as Minister for Natural Resources and the Environment, which other ministries are critical for Monterey to engage with in order to achieve a circular economy? For example, you mentioned jobs. Is this the Ministry of Commerce engaged and interested? You also mentioned plastic. We know plastic waste is such an issue. Is the Ministry for Seas and Islands, or perhaps the Ministry for City that engages with cities and local governments important to you? Or perhaps it's the Ministry of Finance to unlock a few of those policy instruments like taxes and subsidies. So I'm curious, which are those ministries that you like to engage with on the topic of circular economy? Thank you.
Vâng, đây là câu hỏi rất hay.
Thank you for your interesting question. But the thing that matters is that there should be someone to take the first step, right? So for that initiation, in Vietnam, as far as you know, the Communist Party will take the lead. And in the resolution of the 13th National Congress of our party, it is stated that we will move from the linear economy that is based on natural extraction to shift to the natural-based solutions, and in which we also identify the way forward is the circular economy. So this is a kind of overarching orientation that has been approved in the 13th Natural Congress of the party. From Monterey, Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, we would be mandated by the government of Vietnam to propose methodologies and roadmap for implementation. So in our opinion, Monterey would focus on our areas of mandates. For example, solid waste management, urban solid waste, and rural waste management in terms of recycling. And we'd like to come up with policies for management of importers, producers, and also consumers, in order to have some further discussion and demarcation of who does what and why. So I'd like to mention here on the cooperation. In the law on environmental protection, we also clearly assign the responsible of different party on solid waste management and plastics management and treatment. And there are also some policies, as Ms. Janet Salem has mentioned, and also Ms. Miranda Snitcher has just mentioned in her keynote speech. This is the way of demarcation of producers, importers, distributors, consumer, etc. So we designed the law in order to follow to the 9R principle.
Nhà xuất khẩu thương mại cho đến người tiêu dùng thông qua việc đáp ứng là từ chối.
from the producers and consumers, and there would be the principle of 9R, as I have mentioned. For example, reuse, remanufacture, refuse, reduce, resell, repair, refurbish, remanufacturing, repurchase, recycle, recover energy, and remine. So I think the most important thing is that when we design the criteria for project selection, the Ministry of Planning and Investment of Vietnam is in charge of planning and also resource allocation. So they will select international and domestic projects. And they will use our criteria when it comes to the development of socio-economic development plan and also development projects and interventions. So what I mean here is about the market, the green finance, green credit, tax and fees. These are the economic and financial instruments that can incentivize and also regulate in a way that we would like to have limitations and restrictions. So apparently, we need the participation of MOF, Ministry of Finance. They would be based on our calculation and advice in order to come up with the financial instruments. For example, tax incentives, establishment of funds, or the involvement of the State Bank of Vietnam. We also propose the multi-development bank and the other donors to provide support so that we can identify the sources of fundings and incorporate it into the process of planning and also development, so that from the national angle, we can see the coordination among all the sectors. In one economy, that would be the calculation project by project. So I have mentioned 9R, and there are several sectors we developed to the 9Rs. So we would like to also cooperate with communication agencies and mass media for further dissemination and communication to the public at large, because the consumers would be the most important actors. So we need orientation, the policies, international institutionalization and demarcation of responsibilities and tasks based on our strategy, our plan, and also standards. So I'd like to emphasize that it is not only the role of central ministries, but also the local governments and communities. So the role and of the citizens are very much important, not only limited to large-scale industrial development that we can do with circular economy. However, in small-scale production and trading, we can totally apply the principles of economy, circular economy, especially in terms of agriculture. So it would be a good access based on the indigenous knowledge. So this is my sharing with some of our approach in Vietnam. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. You've mentioned a wide range of other ministries and priorities that would have to come in. You've mentioned multilateral banks. Ramesh, I'll be coming back to you on that question. You also mentioned consumers and behavior. Linda will come to you with that question later. So for now, I'd like to thank you very much for your insights, and we'll come back to you in the Q&A if there are questions further. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. So now I have the
thank you so much.
Thank you. So now I have the pleasure of posing some questions to Undersecretary Kalku in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland. Now, we mentioned a lot of different ministries, but we didn't yet mention the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. However, a circular economy depends on supply chain coordination, and our supply chains are very globalized, crossing many borders. So I'm curious, from your experience, can you give some insight into how international relations or foreign policy can facilitate circular economy, or even if it has gone in the way of circular economy? For example, when it comes to harmonizing standards or facilitating data sharing across supply chains, or even minimum requirements for imports. But you might have other ideas as well. I welcome your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janet, and an interesting discussion indeed. And we're discussing a very international issue here. Even the Ministries of Foreign Affairs will need to focus on these issues. Of course, the topic is relatively new. We're talking about a paradigm shift. We're talking about a systemic change, definitely. Lots of trade policy issues, regulatory market measures are involved here. And I would use an example of the European Union in terms of regional action here. I think the awareness of member states, the awareness of the institutions are pushed by awareness by consumers to turn more green. And the European Union has indeed adopted a EU Green Deal. It was published last year, and it shows how serious the member states and the Union are about greening the economy further. And this is about planning together internationally, regionally, long-term, society-wide growth strategy about shifting how our economies work towards more circularity. Within the EU, we published a first circular economy action plan, actually a very concrete document, contains measures to help stimulate Europe's transition towards the circular economy, boost competitiveness, of course, foster sustainable growth, economic growth, create new jobs, create actually new green jobs also. And the action plan simply established some concrete actions that cover the whole life cycle from production and consumption to waste management and to the market for secondary raw materials. And I believe Miranda already mentioned the other global alliances. There's a global alliance for circular economy and resource efficiency. There's other regional alliances, also in Africa, many African countries.
Oh, Ms. Kalku, I believe you've been muted or you have muted yourself. I'm not sure. Apologies for the interruption.
I believe I have been muted by someone because I didn't touch the machinery. So please keep my micro open. Thank you very much. So I think when we're talking about very long value chains, very complicated value chains, we need to look at the importance of secondary raw materials as a key element and a key for success as well. I mean, in an ideal world, I believe we would have universal rules of production, including for material content and recyclability of each good in the economies. And I would like to ask, why not think big here? Circular economy could be created by harmonizing standards globally. Standardization would enable better recyclability of end-of-value chain materials. It would remain actually at the same time many barriers to trade. So it would be good for economies and it would be good for sustainability. Very good example, the plastics, one of the most problematic waste materials that pollute oceans, that penetrate ecosystems and penetrate all life with microparticles. And of course, there's many measures taken to prohibit transportation of plastics or use of plastic bags and so on and so forth. But this is also a material that can be recyclable, and it often is. So I believe good standards are key here. International standards for plastic types could help design and manufacture products that would become recyclable anywhere in the world. We could close the circle, be more sustainable. We could facilitate trade and create green jobs at the same time. And also, I think Miranda mentioned how energy efficiency plays into this. I mean, with many resource-intensive industries, not only with plastics, but steel, cement, aluminium, we could actually reduce emissions from these industries by over half by 2050 if we tackle this. Right to repair rules would help, certainly boost service businesses, create more jobs in services, and so on and so forth. So we could do a lot across borders, internationally with trade policies, and combining the domestic measures with them. I think this is a very international issue because of the international value chains.
Thank you very much. I think these are important points about the harmonization of standards, which gives a nice, consistent message to the private sector of how to produce the right products and the different business models, so that it's not a very fractured market, but they can have one harmonized market where they can put more circular products and services out. I really appreciate that you mentioned the right to repair policy. I believe there are also product lifespan declarations under discussions, which helps consumers to know where it's worth spending a little bit of extra money for a recyclable or repairable product or a long-lasting product. I wonder if you have any advice for the ASEAN region at the earlier stages of moving towards a circular economy, or how to leverage regional integration in their journey, as we see a lot of national strategies. What particular at early stages would help from a regional perspective?
Well, thank you for a very good question. And I think the Europeans and ASEAN have often compared notes between themselves on our experiences, and in the EU it works in a way that we have a regional roadmap, and then member states create national roadmaps to strengthen the circular transition. This is for each country a good way to explore the most suitable way for them towards circularity. The idea actually for national roadmaps, I think it stems from my country, because the Finnish Innovation Fund, Sitra, has done some really hard work on this for years and years, long term, actually. And together with Sitra, our industries have created low carbon roadmaps to support our ambitious goal, very ambitious goal, actually, to become carbon neutral by 2035. And this approach of national roadmap in circular economies is an important part of this. I think the humble advice for our ASEAN friends would be just to create and commit to a shared strategy, a regional strategy first, and then align national strategies and sub-strategies with the shared one to boost regional trade at the same time. I think it's also important that businesses innovate and can have realistic opportunities. This is also about green economy. Overlapping or too complicated rules should be avoided, I believe, both domestically and internationally. And I think advancing international development of shared rules is also a key. After all, this is not a local issue, only we all in this together.
Thank you very much for the insights. And very inspiring to see the progress in Finland and in the EU. So thank you very much. Okay, so I'd now like to turn to Ramesh Subramaniam from the ADB, who is also charged with working with the ASEAN's member states. So I'd like to touch on the the first question that was raised by His Excellency, the Minister from Vietnam. Where is the money? We keep hearing that the circular economy is a $1 trillion opportunity. So my question to you is, where do we need to invest now to get the highest return?
Thank you so much, Janet. The Minister, Miranda, as well as Ms. Tolku have given fantastic perspectives. In fact, I also like what you have on the screen behind you in terms of particularly, the measure, monitor, prevent type of idea. Greatly appreciate this opportunity. A couple of points before I go to the Minister's question. If you take a macro look, kind of zoom out and take a macro look, the pandemic has had a devastating impact, as we all know. Economic losses in the Asia and Pacific region, they've been estimated up to $2.5 trillion. So that's massive. 67 million jobs lost. And this, by the way, the 2.5 trillion accounts for about 30% of the total global output drop. Now, in that context, we can also, as Sonabe-san was saying at the beginning, translate these problems or issues into opportunities. And now is the time basically to translate those problems into opportunities. While the pandemic has obviously been horrible, it also presents us with opportunities to, probably a lot more opportunities to go more circular. Let me just highlight a few points. The Minister's 9R framework is very comprehensive, and what Miranda covered, what Ms. Tolku talked about, all of them have got fantastic elements. If you look at, for example, the 9R framework, there are interconnected elements. If we look at sectors such as regenerative agriculture opportunities, healthy and productive oceans, there is an agenda that is emerging in ASEAN, which is actually, we are very happy to work with many countries. Sustainable urban development is certainly a pathway. And there are core consumer-driven circular economy models that Miranda talked about, significant opportunities there, as well as finally clean energy or energy transition that many speakers mentioned. So in all of these, there are significant opportunities. Now, where is the money? There is, in fact, money, plenty of money, in fact, out there. Now, with the pandemic, clearly, the fiscal space of public sector is certainly going to be constrained. Clearly, many countries are going on fiscal discipline. When it comes to fiscal consolidation, it's not a matter of if, it's going to be a matter of when. Now, that certainly provides opportunities for the private sector, but private sector is not going to come in unless the risks that are out there that are mitigated. What Ms. Tolku mentioned in terms of upstream reforms that we need to put in place, and things like harmonization of standards and practices, a lot of other enabling environment type of reforms that we need to put in place. Now, in this context, what are we doing at the ADB? I would say three things. One is ideas, second is skills, and third is money. When we look at new ideas, well, there are lots of new ideas. If you take, for instance, in the context of circular economy, again, kind of zooming out, if you look at fourth industrial revolution, the concept that was introduced, not too long ago, what are the pathways in terms of looking at changes that can be made in different sectors, whether it's consumer-oriented sectors or utilities and infrastructure sectors? So that's one, that mapping that we've been doing in ASEAN, working with many countries, particularly Indonesia, Vietnam, and the Philippines and Thailand. These are the four countries. Second is in terms of looking at skills, you have certainly the system of education and things like on-the-job training. The entire learning ecosystem needs to change. And third is money. With regard to money, what we have done is, well, immediately related to the pandemic, ADB support is $20 billion in helping with economic recovery, not counting the vaccine support. But in terms of moving ahead, we believe there are plenty of green recovery opportunities, and particularly for the public and private sectors to work together. We have set up an innovation hub in Southeast Asia Department, working with the ASEAN countries in ADB. Ocean finance is a key part of this. ADB itself, with regard to energy, clean energy, climate change, particularly at a broader level, we have an institutional commitment of at least $6 billion per year. As part of that, we are looking at a number of projects, and we have set up an ASEAN catalytic green finance facility, through which we have now mobilized over $2 billion of funding, including about $300 million that have come from the Green Climate Fund, with a significant portion of that going in as technical assistance. Now, I said that private sector is not going to come, although plenty of money is there. There is a challenge in terms of how do you translate all these big needs into bankable opportunities. That is where the challenge lies, and that's what we are focusing on, Janet. Let me pause there.
Okay, so you've said that the money is there. There's plenty of money, I heard, but the framework needs to be right. The system needs to be conducive to that kind of investment, particularly mitigating some risks and having maybe a consistent policy framework. Some of the topics that Undersecretary Kalaku mentioned earlier. So let me perhaps take this forward to Linda, as I see we're a bit pressed in time. I may come back to you, Ramesh, on more specific questions about the money if we have time. But I'd like to thank you for your perspectives in the meantime. So Linda, over to you from your perspective of a think tank that's aiming to achieve this inclusive and sustainable growth in Asia, leverage that plenty of money that's out there. I'm wondering how a government can design the policy to really grasp those opportunities presented by the circular economy. As we heard from His Excellency, the Minister for Natural Resource and Environment, this is a topic that involves multiple ministries and multiple priorities. That can be very complex to design the right kinds of policies. So perhaps you could share your perspectives on this matter.
Thanks, Janet. And everyone's been so comprehensive. I think there's very little left to say, but let me just try to add a few things here. And let me frame my response in terms of maybe what it will take to motivate policymakers in countries that have not yet embraced a transition from linear to circular, and in countries like Vietnam, what it would take to implement those policies. So, just as an investor needs to see an opportunity to invest, I think it's the same with policymakers. They need to see that circular economy presents an opportunity that will, pay dividends in future. And to illustrate, let me use the infrastructure sector. We know that the infrastructure needs of developing Asia are massive. We may recall that in 2016, ADB released its estimates for the financing costs of critical infrastructure in developing Asia from 2016 to 2030. And that was approximately $26.2 trillion for the period, almost $3 trillion of which for climate mitigation and adaptation. But I would argue that, 5 years later, the discourse in circular economy and the SDGs related to resource utilization have really gained pace. And so I think it's clear, and I would argue that circular economy represents an opportunity to offset not just the cost of infrastructure, but also its carbon footprint. So how? And linking back to what Miranda already said, circular economy wants to leverage innovation in design to principally achieve, two things. A, it wants to ensure longevity for infrastructure so that, after 10 years, infrastructure is not demolished and thrown on a scrap heap. That the life of infrastructure should be, 50 years plus, right? And And then B, it wants to ensure that the end use of infrastructure is kept in mind when designing. So if the end use is kept in mind, then that would mean that it's easier to sort of dismantle end life, and the components and materials in infrastructure could then be repurposed, reused, remanufactured more readily. So by keeping materials in the system for longer, I think that really gives an opportunity to achieve, a reduction in resources. And I should say also that the two biggest, probably the two most important materials in infrastructure, steel and cement, are also two of the biggest contributors to global CO2 emissions, ranging respectively 7% for steel and 8% for cement. So if you reduce the usage of those and other materials, you can lower carbon emissions. So getting back to this opportunity, I think it's twofold: cost and CO2 emissions, offsetting both. And I think that this really presents a path and a fundamental opportunity to decouple economic growth from intensive resource use and environmental degradation. This should be sufficiently aspirational for policymakers to rally around and to motivate policymakers and to motivate implementation of circular economy policies.
I really appreciate what you said about designing the infrastructure for a circular economy, because now, having been based in Bangkok the last 8 years, I'm wondering, when we move to shared mobility and we no longer need so much parking spaces in our buildings, how can we use that bottom third of all our buildings in Bangkok for something else other than parking, for instance? So that I do agree with you on that. Okay, I have now received some questions in the chat, which I'd like to take and start passing through to our panelists. Starting with Ramesh, back to the money. Where's the money? So the question is, there's different pots of money for different needs when it comes to that transition to the circular economy. And the specific question that we've got is, what about for entrepreneurs who have a new business idea that maybe, and I'm now adding to the question, may not be easy to invest in by typical sources of finance, maybe a little bit more risky, more of a moonshot approach, but could be a game changer for circular economy. Where can they go for money? My other question is for SMEs that are employing a lot of our Asian citizens, is what about a small SME? They can't sort of jump through all that red tape to get to money, but they can make some changes towards a circular economy. What about these two groups? Where can they find some money?
Thanks, Janet. In terms of early stage startup, I'll just look first narrowly at ADB perspective. We have established recently a new initiative called ADB Ventures, which could be providing support for early stage startups, and that's the idea. In fact, for business ideas that are there that are being tested elsewhere, or there is a very strong business case to be made, ADB Ventures can support. And there are many others out there of that nature. In ADB's case, we will bring scale. We will also work with a number of partners outside in terms of mobilizing, leveraging private capital coming in. Now, having said that, with regard to particularly circular economy, there are tested models that are quite prevalent elsewhere in the world. In the Asia and Pacific region, particularly if you're looking at countries in Southeast Asia, they have not yet been tested. So there needs to be support provided. So what we are doing is to work with countries in terms of creating that system and providing funding to them. For example, in some countries, Cambodia, we've been talking to them about through an SME fund in terms of supporting the startup, creating a startup ecosystem. Now, so that's partly to the second question on SMEs. You also need, in order to the so-called red tape, we need to work with the banking sector in terms of looking at the lending practices. Obviously, they will be looking at the risks involved. So what do SMEs need in terms of particularly small enterprises? Medium enterprises may have more capacity. But for small enterprises which are willing to change their system and go into circular economy type of production models, they need to establish the proof of concept. And we need to develop a business case. So we've been providing technical assistance in many countries, and also working with the banking sector in terms of changing their risk management practices, because there is a change in the mindset that is needed, which, for example, in Europe and North America probably has been achieved, but not been achieved so far in developing Asia. In terms of resources, if you look at, again, ADB Ventures, I mentioned as a specific case, ADB does about $3 billion, $3 to $3.5 billion in terms of private sector funding every year. That is ADB's own funds. And then we add another about probably $7 billion in terms of co-financing. Out of the 10 billion, about 7 billion or so tends to go for large scale infrastructure type of projects. But the remaining 3 billion could be potentially for a number of small and medium-sized enterprises, and also in sectors that have been frontier so far. And we are looking at circular economy type of models to look for opportunities and to finance them. We do need scale, but we also need to help these entrepreneurs address the risks involved, Janet. I'll pause there.
Thank you very much. So there are pots of money, perhaps in national innovation funds, that can work with smaller business ideas, or perhaps SME funds as well. This sounds like a great idea. I have two more questions. We have a few more minutes. So one is about consumer behavior, and one is the logic of the circular economy. I'll start with the second one first, and if I could please ask Under Secretary Kalku, because in Europe and in Finland, you're a bit more advanced with circular economy. So my question is, from the audience is, if the logic of the circular economy is so compelling, why aren't companies doing it already? So I'd like to ask you, from the perspective of a country where companies weren't doing it, but now they are, do you have any insights into what was holding them back to begin with, and what brought them to the table?
Well, a very relevant question, I think, and change always requires a motivation and some efforts. Usually, we human beings, we continue doing the same thing as we did before, if we can choose. I think one element has been consumer awareness, definitely. Consumers have become much more aware of sustainability, about conservation of nature, about climate change, energy issues, and simply they redirect their behavior, their consumption, and prefer products that are sustainable. And this is a gradual change. It didn't happen overnight with those companies that have already turned much more sustainable. It takes some time. There's also been international awareness that is pushing all of us into right direction with the United Nations Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. So it takes some time, but I think one element for small and medium-sized enterprises is also that what we're talking about here will be economically viable over time. Simply creation of a stronger service sector will help to create jobs in SMEs. And certainly with information, with startup funding, and with definitely SME support funding, I think the change can be made. It will take some time. This is not happening overnight, but I think we need to be patient. And Finland, together with the ADB, actually set up a fund supporting startups in clean energy and sustainable sectors. And it is also supported by the Nordic Development Fund. This is the kind of mechanisms we need. This will take some time, but I'm quite convinced it will happen, even if it didn't happen in the past years yet.
Yeah, actually, maybe one follow-up is the role of public procurement. And I'm wondering if governments can take the lead. You mentioned that these circular economy businesses need to have a market in which to sell. Perhaps government procurement could get the ball rolling. Have you seen any public procurement policy on innovation or circular economy that can bring these businesses at that initial market?
Oh, absolutely. Governments need to take the responsibility, and many are taking the responsibility. But public procurement is an important element, absolutely. And there's also, I wanted to mention the taxonomy rules in the EU, which was adopted as an approach in April this year, directing financing towards sustainable objectives, making sure that standards are there, reporting is there. The aim is to avoid so-called greenwashing, making sure that actually investments go to right sustainable direction also.
Thank you very much. Yes. I'd like to just ask Linda to provide some final reflections on innovation and how important is it really to circular economy? Are there low-hanging fruits that we can go for, or do we really need to focus on leveraging innovation? If you could briefly give us a few reflections before we close. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Janet. I think the importance of innovation for circular economy cannot be overstated. And in the context of developing Asia, there's a huge gap between what developing economies, developing countries spend on R&D and what developed countries spend. So, for example, South Korea would spend, in the neighborhood of 3 to 4% of GDP on R&D. And meanwhile, developing economies spend very negligible amounts, perhaps 0.1 to 0.2% of GDP on R&D. So there's a massive gap. And to be clear, the type of innovation that we need to see from emerging economies, it's not going to be that how can I say, a global game changer type of innovation. It can be, more incremental, can be, adapting innovation. But there's still a lot of room there to achieve, growth on the back of those types of innovations. But it will still require investments from the government, and it will require government in a coordinating role. So, but one big opportunity here for circular economy, and again, in infrastructure as an example, with the proper investment, I think that, developing economies can actually leapfrog. We hear that term a lot, but it's a great example in the infrastructure sector, because finally, developing countries may be at an advantage vis-a-vis their developed counterparts. And what do I mean by leapfrog? 65% of the building stock required in OECD countries to 2060 is already in place. But for emerging economies, developing countries, we're talking mainly about new infrastructure, right? So there's a real opportunity now to, grasp those opportunities and ensure that design, as I mentioned before, captures the opportunity to offset both the cost of innovation and the carbon footprint in the future. But as I say, it's not going to happen in the absence of government action. Government has to be there with financing, and it has to be there in a coordinating role. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Linda. And I agree, there's so much infrastructure left to build in our region. It's an exciting area to channel some of these circular economy policy goals so that we can see it happen for our region. So there's been a lot of food for thought. I'd like to thank all the participants for their questions. We'll come back to you on a few of those in the chat, but for now I'd like to thank the honourable panelists for their valuable insights from government, from think tank, from the Multilateral Bank, and of course thank Miranda for providing that inspiration from the very beginning. So thank you very much, and back to you, Derek.
Thank you very much, Janet. His Excellency Minister Tran Honghua, Undersecretary Kalku, Director General Subramaniam, and Linda for your engaging discussion. So because we're a bit behind on schedule, we're going to skip the break and we're going to move directly into the paper presentations. So in the following session, we'll be having two papers presented concurrently. Track 1 on governing transition to a circular economy, and track 2 on investing in a circular economy. So we will split into 2 breakout rooms, and you will have the option to select which one you would like to hear. So paper 1 in track 1 is titled Regulatory and Legal Framework for Plastics, Extended Producer Responsibility. And paper 2 in track 2 is Business, Enterprise, and Investment Cases in Circular Economy. Okay. So at this time, we will be opening the breakout rooms. And again, please select which one you would like to go to.
Recording in progress.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this track on plastics. Let me just quickly introduce the author that's going to give the first paper, and that's Gregorio Rafael Bueta. He is a faculty member at Ateneo de Manila University School of Law. Gregorio is an environmental climate and sustainability lawyer who has worked with governments, private sector, and international organizations. He's been involved in policy and legislation work concerning plastics, solid waste, waste to energy, protected areas management, and sustainable cities. And Gregorio is going to present a paper today entitled Circular Economy, Policy Initiatives and Experiences in the Philippines, Lessons for Asia Pacific and Beyond. So Gregorio, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Linda, for that introduction. It's really a pleasure to be presenting this afternoon, and thank you to the organizers, to ADBI, for inviting me to present this paper. Let me share my screen. Sorry. Wait. Okay, I will just share my screen. Okay.
Hello.
All right.
Hello.
Okay.
Thank you, Gregorio. And could you, okay, good. Now it's in
Yes, yeah.
presentation mode. Thank you very much.
I hope you can all see my screen. All right, so good afternoon again from rainy Manila. After weeks of warm weather, we are now experiencing, I think, the start of the rainy season. So this afternoon, I'll be presenting to you the short paper I contributed on circular economy experiences in the Philippines. And I recall over a decade ago when I started my legal career, one of the first things that I was looped into was actually a plastics bag ban in the Philippines. And I think that's what started me out in this journey of working on circular economy and waste management in the Philippines and in the region as well. And I wanted to take stock of what has been happening over the past decade and to see if there are lessons and bits of experiences which can be shared not just for advocates in the Philippines, but also for those in other developing countries. Okay. So this afternoon, I'll be putting into context what's happening in the Philippines. So I'm looking at the Philippine waste crisis. Then we'll briefly go through the legal and policy frameworks related to circular economy. And I'll look at both current and existing measures and proposed measures that have been suggested over the last decade. This will be followed by analysis of trends of these existing and proposed measures and some policy recommendations to hopefully push circular economy in developing countries and in the Philippines too. Okay. So the Philippine waste crisis. This is what I would call a crisis of pandemic proportions. And solid waste management has been a problem for decades in the Philippines. This is due to a lot of factors. Analysts will say it's due to rising populations. Right now, current estimates is that there are about 110 million Filipinos, a 16.17% poverty rate as of 2018, and an urbanization rate as of 51.2% as of 2015. And if I'm not mistaken, this is expected to go up to about 60-65% by 2050. There's also increasing waste generation. Current estimates by DNR EMB show that waste generation throughout the country is expected to increase to 23.6 million tons by 2025 in about 4 years. There's also inadequate waste management infrastructure. For a country with 1,634 cities and municipalities, there are only 237 sanitary landfills. And of the 42,000 barangays or small villages in the country, there are only 11,625 materials recovery facilities. These are supposed to be the first point where sorting, segregation, and diversion to recycling should happen. Couple this with weak enforcement and implementation, then you really have this waste crisis in the Philippines. The plastics problem has been in the limelight recently. A recent study by WWF has shown that only 9% of plastic is actually recycled and 35% is leaked into the open environment. And 2015, we're all familiar with the study. The Philippines has been ranked as the third largest contributor of ocean plastic waste. Of course, the ongoing pandemic has increased the amount of waste generated, and the actual impacts are yet to be known. So I'll jump to the legal and policy framework. before I get into the details, one thing to point out is that currently there's no integrated circular economy strategy or policy framework in the Philippines. But as we will see in the next few slides, general waste management laws and policies directly or indirectly relate to CE concepts and approaches. So for current and existing policies, you have first the policy pronouncements and issuances. Our DNR, our Environment Department, has said that waste management is a priority. They intend to enclose all illegal dump sites and establish more of the MRFs, the materials recovery facilities, and also help local government units in the implementation of waste management laws, the local governments being the frontliners when it comes to implementing our country's national waste management laws. You have our solid waste management strategy, although this is a bit outdated, and if I'm not mistaken, this is being implemented. It provides for 7 major and 3 cross-cutting components, which include bridging policy gaps, capacity development, sustainable solid waste management financing, and focus on enforcement. You have our most recent Philippine Development Plan, which provides for a target of waste diversion rate of 80% by 2022. That's by next year. And to do this, some of the strategies involved include compliance with international laws, improving the practice of 3Rs, and also promoting sustainable consumption and production by promoting the polluter pays policy, creating a sustainable market for recyclables and recycled products, and creating a system for certification and establishing information systems for green products. Okay, but do note that even though these things have been put in place in our development plan, none of these measures have been enacted so far. We also have a draft plan of action for marine litter, which some of the measures include promoting circular economy and sustainable consumption, and preventing sea-based litter. And sea-based litter program to be included in our waste management systems. In terms of laws, I'd like to highlight 2. Of course, our main law, as some of you may know, is Republic Act 9003, or the Ecological Solid Waste Management Act. This is the law which provides for the sorting, segregation, collection, transport, etc., dealing with the waste. So this is our main law for waste management in the Philippines. And in terms of circular economy, it does set for guidelines on recycling and recovery, encouraging greater private sector participation, market-based instruments to promote self-regulation among waste generators, and integrating solid waste management in the academic curricula. The second law I wanted to point out is PD 1152, or the Philippine Environment Code. This is about a 50-year-old law, almost a 50-year-old law. But it's interesting that when this law was passed almost 50 years ago, and this coincided with the growth and emergence of environmental law globally. There was already an ancient reference to circular economy when it said that one of the goals of it was to encourage, promote, and stimulate technological, educational, economic, and social efforts to prevent environmental damage through recovery, recycling, and reuse of waste and waste products. So there was an early reference already in Philippine laws to the circular economy concepts that we know today. You have other laws, RA 6969, which deals with the movement of waste, waste trade. A Clean Air Act, which provides for a ban on incineration of waste. We have a recent Philippine Green Jobs Act, which provides for incentives for companies engaged in recycling and circular economy initiatives. Okay. I'll move to proposed measures over the last decade. So you saw earlier the current measures that are still existing, and over the last decade, one thing that I noted was that it seems like change takes time. Save for the Green Jobs Act of 2016, our main laws on waste management and those relevant to CE are more than 20 years old. And since 2010, A total of 390 bills and resolutions have been filed in both chambers of Congress, in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, relating to various aspects of CE. But sadly, none of these measures have translated into a binding law or policy yet over the last 20 years. 10 years, I mean. Here are just two charts which show the measures in the different chambers. I focused on measures dealing with plastics, waste management, waste management, and circular economy. And you will note that during and I'll jump to this in a few seconds. And during the current 18th Congress, there have been two measures passed relating to circular economy, and we'll have a look at these in a bit. Okay. But before that, so the categories of proposals over the last 10 years, and this sort of a summary of what has been proposed. One of the first category is on waste management, particularly of toxics and hazardous waste. So bills would try to improve the waste management systems, provide incentives, improve education and information campaigns. Second, and probably the most common, is on plastics regulation. The proposals here will include prohibition and use of certain types of plastics, particularly the SUP, single-use plastics, improve recovery and recycling, labeling for better recycling, use of alternative or native materials, incentives for compliance, and penalties for non-compliance and violators. Third category would be dealing with waste disposal, particularly on e-waste and food waste. Food waste. Some of these measures have been related to have been seen as a poverty alleviation measure, and also because current statistics will show that majority of waste generated by Philippines households is organic and food waste. So there have been some measures dealing with that. Toxics and hazardous substances in plastics have been another area of concern related to the second point. More recently, there has been an increase in proposals on a ban on waste importation or a stricter regulation of waste trade. This has been because of the incidents in recent years of illegal waste shipments coming in, or misdeclared shipments coming into the Philippines. You have waste from Canada, South Korea, Hong Kong, coming in, being declared as recyclable plastics, but they ended up being municipal or residual waste. And this another recent, some of the recent categories of proposals have been on repealing the ban on incineration. I did mention that our Clean Air Act had this ban on incineration, and the recent proposals call for a repeal of that ban to allow thermal WTE facilities to be established here in the Philippines to deal with the growing waste crisis. During the 18th Congress, and I'd like to think that I would like to ask if there is a spike in interest, and does it reflect a possible change? There have been several measures and proposals that have been brought up for the first time, two in particular. There have been bills on the EPR scheme in the there have been measures on in the House of Representatives and in the Senate for an EPR scheme in the Philippines. And what I wanted to focus on is this circular economy law, which has been filed just last September 2020 in the House of Representatives. And I think it's probably the first time that a proposed measure used the term circular economy, and the measure deals directly with CE concepts and policies. This is House Bill 7609, filed by former Senator Lauren Legarda. And here in the bill, she calls for mainstreaming CE and sustainable consumption and production in Philippine government strategies, a just transition to a low emissions and resource efficient economy, zero waste circular economy, and it also calls for a phase out of single-use plastics, an EPR scheme, life cycle assessment program, a circular public procurement program, and a whole host of other measures. Currently, the measure is still pending at the committee level. The 18th Congress is due to end by next year when we have our national elections. So It might be a long road for this bill to actually become a law, but at least the positive impact of this is that circular economy is now finally part of the narrative within our legislators.
Gregorio, 1 minute, please.
Okay. So a quick analysis of trends in legal frameworks. There's adequate justification for this push for circular economy. However, it seems like there is this piecemeal and ad hoc approach to addressing waste management issues. Proposals tend to be reactive to current events, what I would call the flavor of the times. Whatever's in the news, our legislators would file bills. There's a lack of follow-through on proposals, both on part of legislators and even civil society advocates. And there's been no serious push for circular economy. So in terms of policy recommendations, if I can have a minute or two more, I think first thing to do, and this was said earlier during the conference, we need to have a blueprint or a plan or a strategy in place for the long run, because circular economy will not happen overnight. There has to be changes and reforms in other sectors, taxes, incentives, business models, helping SMEs, helping community organizations scale up what they're doing. So these kinds of things have to be integrated into a master plan or strategy. This avoids the piecemeal or ad hoc approach. This can also begin with an assessment of the policies and gaps and resources needed. Second important thing to do is that there has to be proper enforcement of waste management laws. And a lot of experts will say that this is crucial in order for circular economy to actually take place in a country.
30 seconds, please, Gregorio.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. There has to be not just a whole of government approach, but a whole of society approach. So there needs to be political will from the government, counterpart investments in innovation from the private sector. NGOs can scale up their backyard CE programs, and citizens need to we need to secure their buy-in. There has to be not just a policy shift, but also a cultural shift. There has to be a parallel effort at reducing waste and consumerism, moving towards zero waste perhaps. There needs to be a change in consumption patterns, and people need to be educated that we are moving towards CE and everybody needs to do their part. And lastly, I think any CE policy needs to take note of other critical issues that can bog down reforms. This can derail CE initiatives. For example, the issues of jobs, informal waste sector are very critical and crucial here in a country like the Philippines. And of course, the usual concern of added cost to consumers. Who will shoulder the cost of CE facilities, added cost to products because they will be recycled or they need to be relabeled, or production patterns need to be changed.
Need to wrap up, please, Gregorio.
Yes. So that's it. So I think just these 5 points. And I think these are not only recommendations for the Philippines, but my best bet is that these are issues that other developing countries are also experiencing, and probably lessons which can be applied to promote circular economy in their countries. Thank you very much. Maraming salamat. Good afternoon again.
Maraming salamat, Gregorio. That was excellent. And having lived in the Philippines, ADB's headquarters is in the Philippines. I would absolutely agree with you that on the need for behavior change, but the government has to facilitate that by giving options for waste management. We know that much of the plastics in oceans actually comes from rivers in the Philippines, but people need options for their waste, and I think you've touched on really significant issues there. So thank you. Let me quickly move to our discussant for this paper, Anurod Sachdeva. He is German Chancellor Fellow, Resource Efficiency and Circular Economy, Ecologic Institute in Germany. His main research interests are urban environmental issues, including solid waste management with a focus on plastics and circular economy. Anurod, the floor is yours, please.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Linda, for the introduction. And first of all, thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity to participate as a discussant in this well-timed and relevant conference on circular economy in emerging markets. And as you have already introduced me, I'm Anurag Sachdeva, working as an international fellow at Ecologic Institute, and we are an environmental think tank based out of Berlin in Germany, and we work in circular economy and resource efficiency and also other projects. So I'll just quickly share my screen to, I hope everybody can see the screen.
Yes, and if you could just share that in slideshow mode.
Is it now visible in the slideshow mode?
Not quite.
Yeah, okay. Perfect. So first of all, I would like to congratulate Mr. Gregorio Boyer, and sorry for if I mispronounced your name, for this work on collating information on circular policy initiatives and experiences in Philippines, and also the lessons that it offers for Asia, Pacific, and beyond. So just to start the discussion on this paper, I would first start with the strengths, like what have been the strengths and the contribution of the paper. So it adds to the discussion, the ongoing emerging focus on circular economy in developing economies. So there is a lot of movement happening, knowledge transfer from countries which are at the forefront of circular economy, and the developing economies are trying to replicate and are trying to contextualize circular economy in their own countries. So this adds to at a very macro level, adds to that discussion. And how it adds to that discussion is by taking a very comprehensive stock take of what have been the existing laws and policies, and what are the proposed laws and policies. And one of the things that also it takes into account is the time gap, like as to how we also saw in the presentation, in the existing policy, the existing laws that have been passed are as to how they are like more than 20 years old, and the new policies and regulations that have been presented, that have been proposed, but have not actually been enacted. So they have not been converted to an act. So this also gives as a time frame, like as to how the huge gap between what has already been implemented and also the new reforms that are very much needed to give that push for circular economy. And specifically would like to focus on the section on proposed measures, which shows like as to how over the last decades, how despite an emphasis on plastics, waste management, and circular economy, which was also shown in the presentation, that there has been no tangible results in actually converting it into an act. So this also highlights the laggard policy process that a lot of emerging economies also face. So which also offers lessons and also retrospective lessons for emerging economies to learn from. And also like linking back to this, the last, I mean, not the last, but also one of the contributions or the strengths of the paper is as to how it is cognizant of the challenges which are faced by developing countries. First is like for the existing regulations, in which there is like the problem of enforcement and ensuring implementation, and then also the challenges that are faced in introducing new regulations. So since there is no proper enforcement of existing regulations, so that does not also build a strong foundation to introduce new regulations. So it is cognizant of this challenge, and it also highlights in the paper as well. And then these are some like bullet points that I tried to highlight, and definitely there are like more contributions, more strengths, and also some of the elements. In this slide, I've tried to cover some of the elements that have been missing, or some of the recommendations that I could, if I may, like I could propose from my side. So there was I saw that in the summary of the paper, there was a mention of global trends. And I strongly believe that there are a lot of best practices that can offer support as well as offer empirical evidence in terms of introducing as well as developing circular economy law and policies. So developed countries, obviously, because of a lot of countries have been at the forefront of adopting circular economy policies, for example, the EU, and also in Northern America, for example, Canada. And then looking in the similar context as well of developing economies, there have been a lot of countries which have introduced policies which are related to circular economy. So there are examples from India, from China, so on and so forth. So I think this section could be added as or is like something that could be supported from the best practices. And a lot of the policies, like by going through the paper, you can understand that the policies and laws, so there are certain barriers that are existing, that because of which the policies and laws have not been able to materialize. I think there is a missing differentiation between also how the policy and laws could support a push for circular economy, and also what would be the barriers for the circular economy. And also in some of the policies and regulations, explanation, a connection to circular economy, I found that it was missing. So for example, the Philippine Clean Air Act of 1999, as to how it shows that there is a ban on incineration and waste to energy policies, and there has recently also been a push for repealing the ban and also construct new waste to energy policies, and how it fits into the broader framework of circular economy, where we move towards upwards in the waste hierarchy and not moving towards, for example, burning. And though, I mean, like, considering circumstances, that also is like a certain part of the economy remains linear. But so highlighting this aspect of circular economy and relating it to the current acts, I think could also be added. And so after taking a stock take of the existing regulations and what have been proposed, and also like two of the proposed circular economy, one is the Circular Economy Act and also the EPR. So what would be the expectations? So the expectations from a circular economy policy or law is also a bit lacking, so that could be supported as well. And this is the next point is coming from my expertise, as I have been working in extended producer responsibility, and what role does it play in realizing and in facilitating circular economy, and especially in emerging economies, as to how it can act as a starting point. So, for example, just as an example of case of India, as to how EPR for plastics was introduced in 2016, and that has actually accelerated the steps and measures for now moving forward to integrating it into the broader circular economy aspects. And also we were discussing in the panels as to where is the money. So how EPR can act as filling that gap in where is the money and deriving investments to push for circular economy. And this is more related to, the last point is more related to the rewording, like some of the recommendations I found could be strengthened and could be reworded to reflect what is in the paragraph. So, for example, there was a recommendation on that this is not just for a whole, or not just a whole of government, but a whole of society approach is needed. So just as a whole society approach, like a multi-stakeholder approach, and the role of industry, civil society, as has been highlighted in the paragraph, but it could be rephrased. And I can also share my recommendations and also some of the later to you, Gregorio, after the session. But this is mostly it from my side. I found it very interesting in terms of looking at the entire timeline of the existing policies and also what have been proposed. And it definitely offers a lot of lessons for all emerging economies in Asia as well as in the other parts of the world. Thank you.
That's great, Anirudh. Thank you very much for those remarks. And I think now I'll hand it back to you, Gregorio. So if you have any response to any of those comments from Anirudh, please do share them with us now. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Anurod, for those comments. And they're really helpful. But first, maybe as a disclaimer, I had a hard time sticking to the to the word limit of the paper. That's why a lot of your comments, I had them in mind, but it was really difficult to squeeze in that much information. You could just imagine the like what you said. I tried to do a very comprehensive look at policies and proposals over the last decade, and I had to squeeze it in the paper. But to address some of your points, first in terms of um, the relation of some measures, for example, the Clean Air Act. As I said earlier in my presentation, it doesn't directly deal with waste management, but some policymakers see it as a hindrance to waste management solutions such as WTE, some and incineration facilities. That's why it's hindering the potential waste management solutions. I do agree that the relationship or other laws can be better clarified, but given the word count and the space constraints, I wasn't able to do so. In your comment on global trends, yes, I wanted to devote a section on that also. I did try to connect the policy recommendations and the analysis with global trends, although it could have been a bit clearer. And I also agree that EPR could be highlighted as a starting point for circular economy here in the Philippines, especially since that in the past 2 years at least, EPR has been gaining a lot of traction in terms of not just push from legislators and policymakers, but also from civil society. And even business organizations are exploring their own EPR schemes. We have FMCGs already implementing their own internal EPR programs. And it's running in parallel with proposals in Congress. So thank you for that. Linda, yes.
Thanks very much, Gregorio. And Anurod had to join another meeting, but can I just ask you to follow up on that first observation that I made, that behavior change is so badly needed in terms of waste disposal, separation, etc. in the Philippines, and particularly waste into rivers. Have you seen any evidence of change there, or can you expect any change with these regulatory frameworks that you've just discussed?
Well, I've been a resident of Manila all my life, and as you said, I think you lived in Manila before. I can say that there has been some positive change in terms of how people see waste, pollution, garbage here in the city. Unlike before, you would see people just dumping their garbage straight into the river without any care. Now you'd rarely see that. Although the problem is you would still see choked canals, choked rivers because of the garbage, and some are saying it's because of the poor waste management. People try to put their garbage in one place, but it's not properly collected, or if it's collected, it's just transferred to another site, which will leak into the street, leak into the drainage. Recent surveys will show that waste and garbage is at the top of the concern of citizens here. A lot of people agree that plastic should be managed well. There may be some ban or regulation, or even they're willing to pay for the use of plastic. So I think at least in the past 10, 20 years, there has been an increase in that awareness, and probably that cultural shift that that I talked about. Although perhaps the cultural shift that I wanted to emphasize on would be the cultural shift of producers and manufacturers and businesses, them being more willing to change the kinds of products that they offer, encourage, provide ways or incentives for people to have a circular economy lifestyle or a more green and sustainable lifestyle.
Thanks, Gregorio. And, if there are any questions from the audience, please feel free. This audience has been very quiet in terms of questions and comments, but let me just quickly follow up on that. We have a few more minutes. Would you say, in your experience, do you think incentivizing or penalties are the more effective approach to achieve behavior change?
To answer your question, I think it should be a mix of both of the carrot and stick approach, as I would call it. Here in the Philippines, the early approach has been the penalties, the fines. So if you're caught littering, you will pay a fine. Local governments, most local governments will close down a business which still uses. I mean, the local governments who have ordinances regulating plastics, part of the penalties will be they will close down the establishment which still uses plastics or styrofoam. But in more recent ordinances and in a lot of the proposals, you see a mix of approach. So they now incentivize not only consumers. Some proposals would say that consumers should get a 5 or 10 peso discount if they bring their own container. Probably what some coffee shops offer here in Manila also. Or they will incentivize businesses which promote more sustainable packaging or go beyond what the local regulations will say. So and I think in terms of the Philippines, at least a mix of both the carrot and stick approach will be helpful. Not just a full range of penalties so incentives and penalties should be a key, and finding that right balance is really the challenge for regulators, I think.
Sure. Yeah. We have time for one question and a very, very short response from you, Gregorio. So let me just read it here. Some policymakers may think it is sufficient to incorporate EPR requirements as part of the other acts and regulations in relation to waste management. What do you think? Do you think a standalone EPR law would be more effective? And that's from Jocelyn Lee for you.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Jocelyn, for that question. I think you would have to look at the current legal frameworks of each country. It's a case-to-case basis, I think. Some countries with more robust or developed waste management laws might find it easier to incorporate EPR within existing laws and regulations. But countries, especially some developing countries with very nascent environmental laws and policies, might find it easier to have a standalone EPR law. But again, similar to what we've been discussing in this parallel session and earlier in the conference, there has to be that integrated whole of government approach. You have to look at different areas of where you need to amend. So probably the EPR, even though you have a standalone EPR law, it might need to provide tax incentives. It might need to make amendments in, let's say, like in the Philippines, in a Clean Air Act. So I would recommend a more in-depth analysis, case-to-case, country-to-country basis. I hope I was able to answer that. Sorry.
Yes, we've learned so much about the Philippines today, and it's been very valuable. Thank you again. And to Anurod Sachdeva for his great remarks. Thanks very much. We are now going to leave this breakout room and reconvene in the main room, and then we can join the next breakout rooms. Thanks again, everyone. Please click to leave the breakout room. Bye now.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
please stand by, everyone, for instructions for the next breakout room. Stand by.
Okay, thank you everyone for rejoining us here in the main room. So I hope you were able to get a better understanding of the two papers that were discussed and engage in some discussion with the discussant and presenter. So let's move on to breakout session 2 on the paper presentations. So for track 1, we'll have paper 3 toward regional circular economy policy for ASEAN and East Asia. And in track 2, paper 4 on unlocking opportunities for circular economy, the case of waste to energy in Bangladesh. So just as in the previous session, please select the room you would like to attend. And the rooms are now being reopened. And then we will reconvene for the closing remarks at 4:50 Tokyo time. And if you are unable to join a room, I will automatically assign you.
Recording in progress.
So, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tomi Särkioja. I work as a private sector development specialist with the ADB, and I will be the moderator for this session. Let's just wait for a few more minutes that everybody can join this room, and then we will start with a short introduction. Okay, it seems that we have all the participants in the room already. So let me use this opportunity to introduce Mr. Michikazu Kojima. He is Chief Senior Researcher in the Institute of Developing Economies in Japan.
Recording in progress.
So everybody can join from the other room. Okay, I think we are ready to start. So welcome again. This is for session 4 for the Unlocking Opportunities for the Circular Economy. My name is Matti Tervo. I work here at the Embassy of Finland in Hanoi in Vietnam, and I will be moderating the discussion today. We have about 45 minutes or about 40 minutes to this session. We will do 10 to 12 minutes presentation with the paper, and then 10 minutes for the discussion, and then we will use the rest of the time for Q&A. Please mute your mics when you're not talking. So I will briefly introduce the presenter and the discussant. Dr. Laura Marciliani is Assistant Professor of Economics in the Department of Economics and Finance and Durham Energy Institute from the Durham University. Laura is an economist active in the fields of environmental, natural resource, and energy economics. She holds a PhD in economics from London Business School. She is a fellow of the Durham Energy Institute and co-director of the Center for the Environmental and Energy Economics at Durham University. Her research has informed previously the Bangladesh Energy Regulatory Commission on electricity pricing and capacity policies. Welcome, Laura. I will shortly just present our discussant as well while I have you here. So Mr. Stefan Rao is a senior urban development specialist from the Asian Development Bank. He's working with the East Asia Department of the Asia Development Bank. He prepares and implements integrated economic and urban development projects, promoting socially inclusive and environmentally sound livable cities. He supports policy and institutional capacity development for national urbanization strategy, city cluster coordination, urban-rural integration, climate change adaptation, and many more topics focusing on the People's Republic of China. So welcome to both discussant and the presenter and everyone joining us here today. So I will give the floor to you, Laura. You can go ahead and present your research.
Thank you, Matti. Let me share my slides. I'm delighted to be here, greeting from the United Kingdom. So my talks today will be on the case of waste to energy in the Bangladesh energy sector. And this is an ongoing project with other economists from North-South University Bangladesh, Saqib Amin, from Copenhagen Business School, Turai, Jamaz Ben Manuel Yorka, and Durham University Business School, Thomas Renstrom, and myself. We will be delighted to receive all your questions and feedback, and you can always reach me beyond the conference at my Durham University email address here. There has been a renewed interest in waste to energy technology, as they can play an important role for the implementation of a circular economy model, and also to foster sustainable development, especially in developing economies. Indeed, it uses a ready, available, and also disposable source of energy, waste. So very recently, the Asian Development Bank has produced a report in 2020 where it assessed that there are currently, as of December 2018, 2,450 waste to energy power plants worldwide. And this number is expected to increase to 2,700 plants by 2028. This substantial growth in the number of W2E power plants is especially remarkable in Asia, in the People's Republic of China, India, Southeast Asia, and other countries. However, Bangladesh is lagging behind. In fact, no W2E power plants are in operation in Bangladesh at the moment, despite the country having a very large population. It's around 163 millions in 2020, according to the World Bank. In fact, Bangladesh is the 8th country in the world in terms of population. And as any fast developing countries, it's also generating a large amount of waste. And there is potential there, indeed. And a study by Islam in 2016 argues that by 2050, the two largest cities in Bangladesh, Dhaka and Chittagong, could be completely powered by waste to energy power plants. A recent report by the United Nations Development Programs also argues strongly for the development of WTE technologies in Bangladesh, and not only based on incineration, and then we heard in the previous presentation that this is a sort of controversial technology, but especially based on alternative technologies such as the gasification and anaerobic digestion. The government of Bangladesh, in its recent 5-year plan, 2020-2025, recognized very clearly the need for the country to invest in W2E technology. And indeed, things are moving pretty fast in the country. At the end of last year, in the media, emerged very strongly the news that a foreign investor, the China Machinery Engineering Corporation, was prepared to invest in building and operating the first large-scale W2E power plant in Dhaka to generate around 40 megawatts of electricity daily from half of the total waste generation of the city. And it's worth to notice that in Bangladesh, 70% of waste is of organic nature. Therefore, despite this kind of waste having a low calorific potential, the WTE technologies can be considered as a main source of renewable energy. And the Bangladesh government is very keen in increasing the electricity generation share of fuel from fossil fuel towards renewable, with an ambition to generate 70% of electricity from renewable sources by 2041. Currently, is actually 2.9%. So the WTE technology is seen as being of strategic importance for sustainable development in Bangladesh. So for us economists, this was a big challenge, and we were extremely interesting to see what developing the W2E technology in Bangladesh would mean in terms of macroeconomic variables and also in terms of CO2 emissions. And we looked at the literature and we saw that for Bangladesh there was almost nothing, and previous literature on WTE technology in developing and emerging economies was focusing mostly on plant-based case studies. So there was here all the opportunities to build on our previous work. I mean 2015, I mean Marciliani 2015, and I mean Dada 2019, to develop a WTE augmented dynamic stochastic general equilibrium model for the Bangladesh economy, with the main research objective to study what the introduction of a WTE technology and power plants like the one from the China Machine Engineering Corporation would do in terms of macroeconomic performance for the country. So briefly, just to give you an overview of our model, I'm not going to the details, we will not have the time, but you're always very welcome to contact me if you want to know more about our dynamic stochastic general equilibrium model. So the main feature is that there are four sectors: the production sector, the energy sector, the household sector, and the public sector. And we also specify a CO2 emission equation based on the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change calculation regarding the carbon intensity of different fuels. So in addition to ascertain the macroeconomic impact of the W2E technology, we will also be able to determine the impact in terms of carbon emission for the Bangladesh economy. Now, there are two features of this model that I want to talk a little bit more about. One is the role of the government and the public sector. As is customary in many emerging economies, so the government in Bangladesh is controlling all fuel and electricity prices. This means that when something happens in the economy, the most of the markets will not clear, since these prices are not allowed to change in response to the changes in the sector of the economy. And because the market do not clear, then therefore market distortion are being created that results in lower opportunities for enhancing social welfare. Now, another feature of a model that I want to focus on, and this can be seen very clearly from the previous, from this slide, if you see especially at the bottom of the diagram, is that our electricity sector includes 4 generators, the public generators of the government, and which mainly use natural gas, the WTE generators that use waste, the quick rentals companies that mostly use oil, which is important in the country, and the independent power producers, which has private generators, which also use mostly natural gas. So this is an important feature because, as we will see later on, the advent of the W2E technology in the country somehow crowds out the use of natural gas with important consequences for CO2 emissions. Now, we calibrate and simulate a benchmark model for the Bangladesh economy, and this is when there are no W2E power plants in the country, and the one can think that only landfill are used for waste management. And then we'll simulate the policy of opening up the grid to a W2E power plant of the scale and scope as the one proposed by the China Machine Engineering Corporation, the first large scale power plant in Bangladesh. And we will compare the value of the steady state variables between the benchmark model and the WTE connected model. And we will use the Dynary software that includes MATLAB routines. Now, the main findings are as follows. So in terms of macroeconomic variable, we find some increase in GDP, industrial output, electricity generation, and standard consumption. Now, these increases that you can see are pretty small, but those are only caused by one power plant being open up in the country. So if one could imagine that the WTE technology is going to be expanded in Bangladesh as for the plan of the government, then you might also imagine that this value might increase substantially. Pretty worryingly, it's also the increase in CO2 emissions. Now, I mentioned before that the government in Bangladesh is regulating oil prices, and therefore, when the W2E technology is implemented in the country, what will happen? The private electricity producer will not change their production capacity because the prices are fixed. And the government instead will act as the swing producer and will reduce production in response to the entry of the WTE power plants in the grid. And because, as I said before, the government is using mostly natural gas to generate electricity, so the natural gas share in the fuel mix for electricity generation will be reduced. And when we look at the IPCC calculation of carbon intensity for different fuels, we notice that the W2E to energy technologies has a higher carbon intensity than natural gas, and this explains the increase in CO2 emission overall after the policy simulation.
2 minutes. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. So we also looked at the impulse response function to see whether the W2E technology will make Bangladesh more vulnerable to oil price shocks. And since the share of oil in the electricity generation fuel mix does not change in response to the entry of the WTE technology, then the difference in the result from the high RF function are very similar across the two scenarios. So our policy implications are as follows, and I hope this will be of interest not only for Bangladesh, but also for other countries which somehow have the same economic and regulatory condition as Bangladesh. First of all, we advocate for the removal of the fixed prices, our energy market distortion, and as they are the fundamental cause of the increase in CO2 emission from the opening up the grid to the WTE technology. So as explained, the WTE technology crowds out natural gas use in the electricity generation fuel mix, and that is due to the fact that prices are regulated and the private sector can actually change their production. Now, we also advocate for a more decisive transition towards alternative sources of energy, such as the W2E technology, because that will somehow break the dependency of the economy on imported oil, which makes the country more vulnerable to oil price shocks and also more prone to pollution from carbon emissions, and the dependency on natural gas, whose reserves are being fastly depleted. And then we also advocate for an expansion of the WTE project to the entire country, include also animal waste, and consider the adoption of alternative technology to incineration, for example, gasification and aerobic digestion. And we believe that this will promote the country towards the path for the circular economy and sustainable development. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Laura. Perfect timing. Thank you for that presentation and the impressive research. It was really an interesting presentation. So I would like to invite Mr. Stefan Rau from ADB now to give his comments as a discussant of this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matti, and thank you very much, Laura, for a very important contribution to this topic. So yeah, I want to thank the organizers for really a meaningful and timely event on this topic. It gets more traction every day, circular economy. And this paper is sort of takes a look at a very specific, very massive WTE proposal, or maybe, we don't know, maybe it's already almost a done deal in Bangladesh, which of course is one of ADB's DMCs, and that is significant for us. The paper is also highly relevant for the bigger picture of solid waste management sector. And then, of course, waste to energy and solid waste management also can play a role as circular economy. Of course, waste to energy directly is not circular economy, but it can play an important role as part of an improved solid waste management systems if it's to scale. I will talk to that a little bit later. So let me highlight a few of the outstanding strengths of the paper, and then allow me to suggest a few ideas what the authors may consider in a future paper. And then also I will provide a perspective of waste to energy as part of solid waste management and the role it may play in a more systemic circular economy environment. And then I will relate to some of the things that we're also doing at the ADB in the area of circular economy and improved solid waste management support. So obviously the key finding that waste to energy would have a positive impact on economic growth for Bangladesh, that is highly, highly relevant and appreciated. And this kind of assessment is really important. And I think this is really helping to guide the government for further policy actions. The paper is also outstanding on the relevance of the topic and the timeliness. I think I mentioned that. And all the assumptions and the method are very solid and highly commended. For example, considering impact on carbon emission, crowding out certain other
recording stopped.
Greener energy forms that's most appreciated, and also including whatever possible market dynamics and price shocks in other energy forms. That's really most welcome. I'm an urban planner, so I leave the detailed discussions on the economic model to the economic experts. But I want to highlight that WTE, so waste to energy, basically has 3 dimensions, and maybe this paper focuses mostly on one. So the waste to energy has first a dimension.
Recording in progress.
As a municipal solid waste management technology. It also, and then it creates energy, so there's the energy perspective, and then it can play a part in a circular economy environment. And the paper takes sort of the stronger perspective on the energy part, and from what we know is the energy perspective is important, but it's only a limited portion of the energy dimension that is important. Like in developed countries, we can probably get 50% recovery from the energy fees, and in developing countries around 25%. So this may be an important dimension from the energy perspective. So in the spirit of this circular economy event, I believe it is right that we can start as one of the activities, one of the practical steps with a significantly improved solid waste management. So that can be one of the steps towards a more comprehensive and systemic circular economy. So a significantly improved solid waste management system would significantly increase the reuse and recycling rates of products and materials, and only leave a very small portion of waste to the final treatment, and that may be scaled waste to energy plants. The paper that you quite quoted, Laura, early from ADB, basically says that the current state of the art in Asia would have a 70% reuse and recycling rate of solid waste, and then the remaining 30% that cannot be recycled would then go to final treatment, like waste to energy or landfill, for example, for inert materials. That is a very important dimension to consider, because many times we see that waste to energy plants are oversized, and then it's a very big problem, that it becomes a very big problem for the municipalities, because they have typically private PPP arrangements with obligations of very high amounts of solid waste that they have to deliver every day. And that, of course, can be in direct conflict with higher recycling rates and targets that a circular economy would obviously would want to do. So opportunities that the paper, or maybe a future paper, could consider would be studying alternatives to this particular proposed investment. We note that this investment is a 3,000 ton per day facility, which is very, very large. In fact, I discussed that with my colleague who wrote that paper that was cited earlier, Stephen Peters, and thanks to him. And he said this is a massive facility, and even the economic efficiency of this facility is maybe too high. And this is an important dimension that should also be considered in the spirit of urban planning and practical solid waste management, collection, and transport, especially in a metro region that is highly congested. So you have one place, all the trucks have to go to this one place, as opposed to maybe a solution where you have two smaller facilities where you break up and have shorter trips and fewer trucks. And that would also contribute to reduced CO2 emission from this transport aspect. That may also be a consideration for a future paper. Okay, yes, I mentioned that already. So what we see from facilities is that an optimal size of a facility is around 1,500 to 1,800 tons per day, that has 2 to 3 production lines at about 600 tons per day, which is sort of the industry standard, and that would be sort of the economic sweet spot of such a facility. So that's why also it may make more sense to have 2 instead of 1 big one in the future. What else? It's important that a big facility is also a very, very high subsidy burden on the government, and I mentioned the implications and the obligations from the government on delivering the waste. That can become a very significant challenge for governments vis-a-vis the private sector partner, and that has also led to some failure of some of these kind of projects. And another environmental concern is that waste to energy plants, they produce highly hazardous toxic residues, most notably fly ash. So 20% of the material that sort of comes out of a waste to energy facility is fly ash that's retrieved from at the top of the chimney, so to say, and that is hazardous waste, and the sustainable management is absolutely not trivial, even a challenge for highly industrialized countries. So that needs to be considered as well, and also ensured that this is done. So consideration of impacts on jobs would also be an important social inclusion perspective for people like us from ADB as a development bank, as a single large facility may also crowd out jobs and recycling activities and companies and formal and informal activities, and that may lead to associated loss of livelihoods and jobs. So which could be probably more retained if we have 2 or more facilities that are located in different places in the metro region. So
1 minute to summarize. Sorry.
I may go over a little bit. I want to make a few points what ADB is doing also. So waste to energy needs to be a part of a sustainable and improved solid waste management system, and can only be a small part, basically 30% of the solid waste, should not be more. So that means in all the dimensioning and calculation, waste to energy should always be have the right scale. In ADB, we have been contributing to circular economy in various forms, including this downstream improvement of municipal solid waste management, including also waste to energy plants that we've supported, for example, in China by our private sector operations department. And then we have done all kinds of other activities in solid waste management improvement, also increasing recycling rates and so forth, wastewater management, using of reused treated wastewater, non-revenue water reduction. We also have activities in circular bioeconomy in agriculture, sludge treatment, and so forth. What I find important as to add as a dimension of circular economy is also the dimension of land. So land use and reuse of formerly used, for example, mining and industrial land and brownfield redevelopment, I think should also be included as one of the dimensions of circular economy. And we have also supported this in some of our countries. So more recently, ADB has been engaging in more circular economy very specifically, and we're now rolling out our program and our interest in circular economy. One of the areas is our clean ocean strategy and policy, and this is supported by a regional TA on plastics pollution reduction. We also have an MOU with EIB, the European Investment Bank, on clean oceans. And in the PRC, we have a very specific program, and now we're preparing a roadmap that sort of goes along with our recently approved country partnership strategy that also coincides with the Chinese 14th five-year plan. So this roadmap will be quite specifically working on policies, institutions, standards, and then we're standards, incentives, disincentives, so market-based instruments, and also education, as was mentioned before, research and development. So there's a whole range of things required. And then we will try to create projects on the local level. So we will work top down and bottoms up. So on the local level, we're trying to aim at circular economy, zero waste cities. So from the upstream, so we're including the upstream activities of life cycle product development and production, the midstream of packaging and logistics, and then the downstream of improved solid waste management, and then try to link all those things systemically together in a place. So this is what we're trying to do. And then while we're doing this in a place, we're looking upward on the policy level and work with the national agencies on policies to enable circular economy.
Thank you, Stefan. I wish we had more time, but we are.
One last, sorry. So at the ADB, we will be very happy and look forward to cooperate with all of you here in the meeting, and many of our development member countries and many experts and agencies like the ones here, or UNEP, OECD, EU, also bilateral partners. And we are happy that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation also contribute to this. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Stefan. Yeah, no worries. You have so many interesting points, and I really wish we had more time. I think we have quite an interested audience, so I would like to just jump directly into the questions. So there is there's references from a couple of participants, Piyush Dhawan and Tin Chan from GGGI, relating to that the circle, incineration is probably not the best option every time when you're talking about circular economy, and it's not the right ambition to burn all the waste. There should be more reuse and remanufacturing and that sort of thing. So how is ADB tackling this, and what are you, and the floor is open also to Laura to tackle this issue. Thanks.
Yes,
Laura.
Yes, Thank you, Stefan, and thank you all participants for the very interesting question. And I do not deny that the waste to energy technology is controversial, and Stefan has highlighted all these controversies very well. And Stefan has also presented an ideal world in terms of a project towards the circular economy, so that all countries should strive to pursue. As I said, Bangladesh is very new into this idea of circular economy, although the ambition is very high. And just to tell a little bit more details about this proposal of the waste to energy power plants in Dhaka. So it will be located near the biggest landfill in the city, and the fuel transportation cost that Stefan was highlighting has a problem in terms of generating higher CO2 emissions, in addition to the incineration technology, will be minimized. And also the impact on jobs. Well, collection will go on, collection waste across the city will continue. Sorting of waste will continue. But is it true that the waste to energy technology uses in less labor in relation to capital? So there might be overall some loss of jobs there. I agree. Yes, as it was well, I think, underlined also in the presentation, organic waste are low calorific potential. Despite that, the plant that is going to be built and managed is very large. And Stefan was pointed out that only 30% of the municipal waste should be used for incineration. The rest instead should be recycled or reused, which was industry is still in infancy in Bangladesh. So there is not yet those kind of activities to be undertaken there. Okay, the plant is large. The plant that is being proposed is very large. Although this will not be the first example of W2E power plants of that scale. In fact, when we were calibrating our model, we refer to some data in connection to the Baku waste to energy power plants from Azerbaijan, and that was well explained in the Asian Development Bank report of the 2020. So we based the electricity generation potential on the Baku power plant. So there are examples of these huge power plants being placed, and that's true. The potential for energy there is also very large. Now let me see if there are other points that I would like to respond on.
Maybe we'll let Stefan answer this question to ADP, if you have any comments on the previous question. Sorry, you are still muted.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, we do. As I mentioned, we do support waste to energy, and it is indeed only advisable from our side, and this paper that you're citing, Laura, is absolutely pointing that out. So it has to be, so the first priority of a solid waste management has to be, of course, waste characterization, proper waste characterization, segregation at source, and so forth, and higher reuse and recycling rates, period, number one. And then there is always some, even in an ideal world of a circular economy, ideally there's no more waste, but in the reality there will always be some waste. And what do you do with that waste? And that waste to energy solution we find is suitable if it is in this overall consideration. What was that other one? Sorry, I lost my thought. Yeah, Marianne. Yeah, sorry, I left my thought. Maybe I give it back to you.
Yeah, well, if you if you find it, then you can come back to.
It,
But
it
Laura,
is a very clear. It is a very clear message, Stefan, and yes, I totally agree. It will take some time in emerging economies such as Bangladesh, but yeah, I totally agree.
So the thought that came back to me was that other forms of energy generation, as with the high component of kitchen and organic waste, may also be used, are we still there? Like biogas production, and of course that would lead a bit more space. But then, of course, the byproducts can also be used in agriculture and so forth.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Exactly.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stefan. And sorry for all the participants whose questions we didn't have time to answer. But obviously, in the next steps of this paper, we have to look at the technology catalog and also the waste, how is it formed, and also the calculations related to greenhouse gas emissions at the landfill. So thank you very much for the active participation.
Recording in progress.
Let's wait a few more moments for everyone to rejoin. Okay, and again, the interpreters have rejoined. Apologies that we're unable to have interpretation for the breakout rooms. But if you go to the bottom panel of your screen, you'll see the interpretation icon, and from there you can select the English channel. Okay, so moving
phần dịch
on.
của phiên dịch. Tiếp theo ạ, xin được trân trọng cảm ơn tất cả các quý vị, các nhà điều hành cũng như là các diễn giả và người trình bày tham luận, bình luận viên có liên quan tới hai phiên thảo luận vừa rồi của chúng ta. Thế và tôi xin được kính mời ông Mika Sukinoja, chuyên gia phụ trách về hợp tác toàn cầu và giải pháp bền vững, Quỹ phát triển đổi mới sáng tạo Sitra của Phần Lan. Thì hiện tại thì ông đang là chủ trì cho một số các cái dự án lớn, ví dụ như liên quan tới diễn đàn về kinh tế tuần hoàn toàn cầu. Thế và ông đã có nhiều kinh nghiệm làm việc cho các cái tổ chức, ví dụ như liên quan đến tổ chức Liên Hợp Quốc cũng như là nhóm đàm phán về biến đổi khí hậu. Xin kính mời ông Mika. Xin được trân trọng cảm ơn. Kính thưa Bộ trưởng Trần Hồng Hà, kính thưa Thứ trưởng Elena Kako, kính thưa các quý vị cán bộ đại biểu của chính phủ và tất cả các quý vị tham dự từ khu vực châu Á Thái Bình Dương. Tôi rất là vinh dự có mặt tại đây ngày hôm nay. Và thay mặt cho Sitra thì tôi xin được trân trọng cảm ơn Ngân hàng Phát triển Châu Á, Viện ADB và Ipsonre, cũng như là các cơ quan từ phía Việt Nam vì đã có phần tổ chức tuyệt vời liên quan đến hội thảo của chúng ta ngày hôm nay. Và tôi cũng xin được trân trọng cảm ơn Ngân hàng và ADB và Đại sứ quán Phần Lan tại Hà Nội đã cùng tổ chức cho sự kiện này. Và cuối cùng thì tôi xin được trân trọng cảm ơn tất cả các tác giả đã nộp bài báo cáo chính sách và đã chia sẻ những phần trình bày của ngày hôm nay. Và cuối cùng thì xin được trân trọng cảm ơn tất cả các quý vị đại biểu đã tham gia. Như là Derek đã nói đấy ạ, đây là một hội thảo bên lề cấp khu vực của Diễn đàn Kinh tế Tuần hoàn Thế giới. Vâng, chúng tôi có gọi tắt đấy ạ. Thì đấy chính là một cái sáng kiến do Sitra và Phần Lan được khởi phát từ năm 2017 và chúng tôi cũng muốn tạo ra một nền tảng để tất cả các nhà hoạch định chính sách, các nhà nghiên cứu và các bên có liên quan có thể cùng bàn thảo về những giải pháp kinh tế tuần hoàn. Kể từ năm 2017 thì nền tảng này đã được mở rộng trở thành một sự kiện lớn nhất trên toàn thế giới về kinh tế tuần hoàn. Thế và chúng tôi rất là vui mừng được thấy rằng sự kiện WCF này đã trở nên ngày càng quan trọng hơn trong khu vực. Với cả cái chủ đề ngày hôm nay chúng ta trao đổi, kinh tế tuần hoàn đã có tác động đến toàn xã hội. Ngoài những tiềm năng về phát triển kinh tế và xã hội, như là Bộ trưởng Trần Hồng Hà đã trao đổi trong ngày hôm nay, tức là kinh tế tuần hoàn có thể giải quyết được những cái thách thức mới nổi, ví dụ như liên quan tới mất đa dạng sinh học vân vân, và chúng ta có thể sử dụng các cái công cụ của kinh tế tuần hoàn để mà giải quyết những thách thức như là biến đổi khí hậu hay là mất đa dạng sinh học hay là các cái yếu tố khác. Và Thứ trưởng Helena Kaku cũng đã có nhấn mạnh đến vai trò của các chính sách về thương mại trong việc hỗ trợ việc đẩy mạnh hơn nữa kinh tế tuần hoàn xuyên biên giới. Và rõ ràng là chúng ta cần phải có sự tham gia đẩy mạnh các cái chính sách về thương mại quốc tế, và chúng ta cũng cần phải thực hiện các cái hoạt động hợp tác quốc tế trong khu vực cũng như là trên toàn cầu để có thể tạo ra được một môi trường cạnh tranh và môi trường thích hợp cho kinh tế tuần hoàn. Thì đây cũng là nội dung mà chúng ta được lắng nghe ý kiến từ ông Ramesh, và chúng ta có thể thực hiện các mô hình kinh tế tuần hoàn như là mô hình là một dịch vụ, cũng như là tăng cường hơn nữa cái vòng đời và việc sử dụng các sản phẩm và nguyên liệu sẽ giúp chúng ta tăng cường giá trị kinh tế để đạt được các cái mục tiêu về mặt lợi ích và hỗ trợ tài chính cho các hoạt động như ông Edu đã trình bày trong phần tham luận của mình. Và ông Ramesh Subramaniam cũng đã đưa ra rất nhiều các cái cơ hội về phục hồi kinh tế xanh theo như là sáng kiến của ADB. Ông cũng đã nói rõ rằng chúng ta sẽ cần sự tham gia của khu vực tư nhân, và khu vực tư nhân sẽ không tham gia nếu như mà những rủi ro có liên quan không được giảm thiểu. Ông Rafael Bueta, giảng viên của Philippines, cũng đã trao đổi với chúng ta những cách thức mà Philippines đã thực hiện để mà đưa ra những quy định về pháp lý về pháp quy về rác thải nhựa để chúng ta có những cái định hướng tốt hơn. Và cái tài liệu của ông đã cho chúng ta biết có thể lập kế hoạch là hoạch định các cái chính sách như thế nào để hỗ trợ cho quá trình chuyển dịch. Thế và chúng ta có thể thấy rằng đây là một cái khung khổ có thể giúp chúng ta thực hiện được các cái mục tiêu trong tương lai liên quan đến những cơ hội về mặt kinh tế và môi trường. Thì chúng ta có thể thấy rằng là chúng ta có thể tăng cường hơn nữa các cái cơ hội, ví dụ như là cơ hội tạo việc làm. Rõ ràng là đây là một cái mục tiêu rất là quan trọng mà chúng ta có thể đạt được thông qua kinh tế tuần hoàn như là bài trình bày đề dẫn của bà Miranda. Thế vậy chúng ta cũng thể thấy rằng chúng ta sẽ cần phải chuyển dịch hướng theo kinh tế tuần hoàn với rất nhiều các cái lợi ích khác nhau và cơ hội khác nhau. Nhưng mà chắc chắn là không có một con đường nào mà không có rủi ro. Và như là bài trình bày của ông bà Laura Marciliani, chúng ta thấy rằng đối với cả nền kinh tế tuần hoàn có thể đưa ra một số các cái thách thức và giảm thiểu những thách thức khác. Và điều quan trọng là chúng ta cần phải dự kiến những cái tác động đó về mặt kinh tế, về mặt môi trường xã hội trong quá trình chúng ta thực hiện chuyển dịch theo hướng kinh tế tuần hoàn. Và tất nhiên là chúng ta luôn luôn mong muốn hướng tới phát triển bền vững, và những sáng kiến như ngày hôm nay sẽ rất là quan trọng để chúng ta có thể gieo mầm cho quá trình chuyển dịch. Như là Citra đã mong muốn chúng tôi cũng muốn làm thế nào đó để có thể kêu gọi sự tham gia của tất cả các tác nhân, và chúng ta cùng thực hiện một hành trình hướng tới một tương lai để nó vượt ra ngoài giới hạn của hành tinh của chúng ta. Thế và tôi xin được chào mừng tất cả quý vị sẽ tham gia với một sự kiện tiếp theo, đó là Diễn đàn Kinh tế Tuần hoàn Thế giới vào giữa tháng 9 năm nay. Chúng tôi sẽ tổ chức cùng với Quỹ Canada về khí hậu và môi trường. Thế và chúng tôi cũng sẽ xin được chào mừng tất cả quý vị đến với Diễn đàn Kinh tế Tuần hoàn Thế giới. Xin được trân trọng cảm ơn quý vị, và tôi xin được nhường lại cho anh Derek. Vâng, xin trân trọng cảm ơn. Cảm ơn ông Mika đã chia sẻ những thông tin về nội dung của ngày hôm nay, cũng như là các bước tiếp theo để chúng ta có thể cùng thực hiện những cái mục tiêu và tôn chỉ theo hướng kinh tế tuần hoàn. Và các quý vị xin lưu ý rằng là đây là sự kiện bên lề cho Diễn đàn Kinh tế Tuần hoàn Thế giới, như là ông Sukinoya đã trao đổi với chúng ta. Và sự kiện Diễn đàn Kinh tế Tuần hoàn Thế giới sẽ được diễn ra vào ngày 13 đến ngày 15 tháng 9. Để có thêm thông tin thì chúng ta sẽ có thể vào ADBI và xem thêm thông tin. Những tài liệu của ngày hôm nay, báo cáo chính sách, hôm nay chúng ta đã nghe 4 tác giả chia sẻ với chúng ta. Chúng tôi sẽ công bố các cái ấn phẩm này sau và chúng tôi cũng sẽ gửi thông tin cho các quý vị. Và cuối cùng thì tôi cũng xin được chào mừng quý vị. Mình có thể xem lại các cái ghi chép nhanh ở trong phần chat mà emoji có thể chia sẻ, và chúng tôi cũng sẽ đưa lên trên website của ABI của chúng tôi. Và đây cũng là phần cuối cùng liên quan đến hội thảo trực tuyến của chúng ta, kinh tế tuần hoàn tại các thị trường mới nổi, khai mở tiềm năng phục hồi xanh tại một châu Á đang phát triển. Tôi xin được trân trọng cảm ơn quý vị đã tham gia trong 3 giờ đồng hồ vừa qua, đặc biệt là Bộ trưởng Trần Hồng Hà, Thứ trưởng Elena Kaku và Vụ trưởng Ramesh Subramaniam, bà Miranda Snitcher từ quỹ Ellen MacArthur và Janet Salem từ UNESCO, và đồng chủ trì của chúng ta từ ADB và Việt Nam, từ văn phòng đại diện ADB tại Việt Nam, ông Tommy và nhóm của ông Tommy, cũng như là từ Đại sứ quán Phần Lan tại Việt Nam, Marty, và từ quỹ Citra, Maria và đồng nghiệp của bà. Và cuối cùng là If tại Việt Nam. Xin được trân trọng cảm ơn tất cả quý vị đã tham gia cùng với chúng tôi ngày hôm nay. Và trước khi mà quý vị rời hội thảo thì tôi xin phép được nhờ quý vị mình dành thêm một vài phút, và chúng tôi cũng đã gửi trên email cho các quý vị, hoặc là chúng ta có thể scan cái mã QR hoặc là vào cái đường link ở ngay trên màn hình đấy ạ, để mình có thể tham gia vào cái khảo sát để chúng tôi tổ chức tốt hơn trong lần sau. Xin được trân trọng cảm ơn tất cả các quý vị rất nhiều.
Recording stopped.